Thank you for having us again today. It's my pleasure to be here. And this is a really great conference. I mean, if you haven't learned something in the last 2 days, you haven't been in the room, right? Everybody agree? I mean, I would like to give Barney another round of applause for putting this together. We've talked about what's happening all around the country. We had Attorney General Bondi here talking about her leadership initiatives. We've heard about all kinds of programs from adult to juvenile mental health and drug treatment, and Susan's story, which just makes my heart pound. And yesterday, Sheriff Deming said to us, you know, you should never miss an opportunity to help someone. And I think Susan's story is a perfect example of that adage. If one judge hadn't given her one more chance, just think about where she and her children might be today. And the science is changing us every day. We're learning so much more about the brain, what happens when you have a mental illness, what's going on in your brain, what happens when you have addiction, what's going on in your brain. And Dr. Latessa and the others who are researching behaviors, the difference between what we think works and what the research shows really works. And let me repeat that. What the research shows really works, that we should be doing. Are we targeting the right people? Are we getting them in the right program? Are they there for the right amount of time? How long, how much, when, and who? And yesterday, Patrick said it. You know, our funders expect us to be doing this. They're looking for research-based results. You're not going to get funding anymore just for being nice. We need to take the science and the research and embrace it, take it home with us, and use it to be even more successful. Everyone in this room operates very successful programs, but with the challenging landscape in front of us, we have to be prepared to be flexible, to move. Don't be a bureaucracy in your own entity. Be ready to change. Take what we've learned and use it. So I just wanted to thank you all for what you do every day, the commitment that you make to change people's lives. It's really awesome, and it's just a great career to be in, and I'm very thankful that I have so many wonderful partners and I get to see so many wonderful people every day. This morning we have 5 presenters. They'll be talking about a variety of programs from diversion and treatment to reentry, and some of them who are doing a combination of those. So I'd like to introduce first Tom Oak. Tom is the CEO of Disc Village in Tallahassee, and Tom is right here, and on his right is Greg Frost. Greg is the Director of Administrative Services Bureau for the Tallahassee Police Department, and they're going to be talking about adult civil citation and the partnerships that they've formed around their program. Catherine Burns is the reentry coordinator for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and Catherine's going to share with us the challenges and the successes that she's had in helping people transition from prison into the community. Judge Steve Leifman in the 11th Circuit in Miami-Dade County is chairman of the Florida Supreme Court Task Force on Substance Abuse and Mental Health in the Courts. And I'm happy to say he's also, I'm not happy about this part, but he's the immediate past chairman of the Board of Florida Partners in Crisis. So he's going to talk to us about the programs that they're doing in Miami. And Mike Judnick, who is Vice President of Justice Services for the Change Companies, is going to tie it all together for us and around some guiding principles and evidence-based practices. So join me in welcoming Tom Oak.
Good morning. Is this working? First of all, it's great being here, and if some of you recall, I was here last year at the very end as well, to pretty much let you know that we had gotten through a process, a very arduous process, to get approval to actually conduct an adult civil citation program. To our knowledge, it's the first one in the nation, and when you start something like this, and in fact, probably unfortunately, it was during an election cycle when you have to talk to the state attorney and the sheriff, chief of police, county commissioners and city commissioners to try to get approval for something like this. When you first think about an adult civil citation, kind of the reaction I get is, where'd this guy come from? You're dealing with people over 18. They should be responsible. They should be held accountable. So what benefit does this have? For the most part, I think people realize, I mean, if you look at some of the startling statistics, some of them have just come out more recently. I mean, I'm not going to go through the list, but if you look at, for example, by the age 23, 49% of black males in America have an arrest record. Now, if you look at my background, I've been doing juvenile civil citation for about 18 years. I think had I not had 18 years of experience in Leon County and Circuit 2 demonstrating that's an effective diversion, I don't think we would have been allowed to undertake this endeavor. One of the startling statistics that we have is that since we started the program in just Leon County, we have over 5,000 individuals who were not arrested and did not recidivate within the first year. So I think that helped us at least convince them that we were entitled to do at least a 2-year pilot. So that's what we're undertaking now, a 2-year pilot program to try to address some of these issues. And if you think about it, what really is in place right now to intervene or try to impact those types of statistics? And I think this is one of the things that we think we can make an impact on. Let me kind of talk about, we call it the box. And they talk, and a better term is the dosage. What do we do with people when they enter our system? Essentially, what we try to do is we try to build a textbook model. We tried to use the latest research, as everyone says they're doing, and we started out using the GAIN-Q as our initial assessment tool. That's the initial assessment tool, if you're familiar. If you're going to do any type of research, the feds like that. And also, you've got the full GAIN, so that if someone enters our system and they need more services, then they would actually move through the GAIN-Q to the GAIN, and if they entered substance abuse services, for example, then you'd go into the ASAM, which is a tool you have to use before they can access the system. So we do the GAIN. We do motivational interviewing, which is a critical part of this. We do a drug screen on all participants. And let me bring a point up here. When we first looked at implementing this model, what we wanted to do is actually target substance abuse and mental health clients entering the system, so drug and alcohol offenses. So as we began to meet with law enforcement at that time, they set up a committee to more or less look at this and make recommendations. And about 2 weeks later, they came back and basically threw us a curveball. They said, no, we don't want you to do just drug and alcohol. We want you to do all nonviolent misdemeanors. So that kind of changed things a little bit for us, because what kind of curriculum do we have that can target this diverse population? So we began looking at that, and in a moment you'll hear Mike Judnick. We luckily found the change companies, which was a lucky break for us, because as you'll hear from his presentation, they're pretty much the state of the art, and they've got the science and evidence-based interventions. So basically through the basic assessment, we're able to identify the key domains that you need to address issues with. So once they come in, as I said earlier, everyone entering the system is also given a drug screen, regardless of the offense. And this is done for several reasons, is that many of you know if you're dealing with a substance abuser or an offender, sometimes they won't tell you the truth. So this is a good way of establishing a baseline. And if you're going to work with these people, you actually need to know what's going on. Law enforcement likes it. The state attorney likes it. They're not violated necessarily if they come in with a positive drug screen. What it indicates to us, for example, if it was a petty theft, they have a drug screen, obviously that indicates there's some other services that need to be provided, so we see it as an opportunity to enhance the services that we can provide this population. We come up with a participation plan where they agree not to use any drugs, complete the community service hours, which is a minimum of 25 community service hours. If it's a drug or alcohol-related offense, they're required to attend 2 AA or NA meetings. There's plenty of rationale for that, which I won't go into at this point. And also we use cognitive behavioral therapy. So when we tried to set the initial dosage, we said that each person will be seen at least 3 times by one of our counselors using cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's sort of the box that we use when we start out with. And now since we've been doing this for 7 or 8 months, we've developed what, I have an unusual sense of humor, what we call the bluebirds and the turtles. And basically the bluebirds are high-functioning college students who say like, hey, I want to get through this process. And the luck that we had starting out, actually the first person ever referred to our program was a graduate student at FSU who wanted to go to law school. He comes into our office, very bright guy, said, where'd you guys come from? You mean I don't get arrested if I complete these programs? I don't have a record? I can get into law school? And we go, yeah. So he was a bluebird, obviously. He completed the program very quickly. Now, we have a lot of turtles, which is good. What the other intent is to identify people in your community. If you've got someone 25, 26 years of age, and all of a sudden they pop up in the system, what does that indicate? Is there an issue or a problem? So in our community, what we try to do is identify people very early, try to intervene, not do any harm, and get them back on the right track. It's basically, there's a lot of research that indicates that, the first contact with the school system, where there's a problem, something should happen. Their first contact with the juvenile justice system, you should do something, hence juvenile civil citation. If you come into contact with the adult system, hence now we have an adult civil citation. So what we're trying to do in our community is develop these intersections where people in our community, when they cross that line, that there's a system there that says, hey, let's take a look and see what's happening and see if we can help you. So that's the overall theme that we have. And the county commissioners love it, because one of the things they realize is in a community like Tallahassee is that why are we eating our young? Why are we arresting people that don't need to be arrested? There's another alternative that will benefit this person and benefit the community and not marginalize them for the rest of their lives, which I'll get into in another minute. They go through the program. We've got a learning management system. So what we try to do is try to make it as cost effective, as science and evidence based, and since most people know how to use the computer and online services other than myself, it's worked out very well. People that don't have the ability to use the computer, then we also have courses where they can come in and they're administered. So we go through this whole process, and at the end we do a client satisfaction survey, because being a pilot, we want as much information as we can possibly get, as much feedback. What are we doing that's good? What are we aren't doing? And then the other thing we do is we also provide a quiz where we sit down and look at their participation plan. So if they were in a drug, we don't call it really drug education. It's like what do drugs do bad to you kind of program. So if they took those courses and some of the others, then we're able to give them a quiz to make sure they took it, not their girlfriend. And because we have a learning management system, we can actually track every time they entered the system, every pre-test, every post-test. And so there's an elaborate system here. So it's not a simple system, nor I don't want anyone to think this is a get-out-of-jail card free. In fact, I was warned by Willie Meggs, the state attorney, said, when we talked about the box, if you will, he said that this is pretty onerous. He said, you may have a lot of people that don't want to go through that, would rather be arrested, in fact. But this is the box that we're using. We've made some modifications, which we'll get into next year, but because this is more or less, this is kind of where we are in the process. There's an evaluation going on. This is the basic model that we're using. And hopefully by next year, we'll have pretty much at least the first 18 months of a rigorous evaluation. The other neat thing that we developed is, how do you know if someone's ever had a civil citation if you're outside the system? So what that means is that you're not in the CJIS system, you're not in the NCIC, you're not in the FCIC. We developed an independent record-keeping system. And I'm not trying to set up a secret society. I don't work for the national security agencies or anything like that. It's an open system between the police department and ourselves. So it's not a secret society that we're trying to establish. But what we developed is we have an online capability, so when an officer contacts a person, open container, they can go to our system to see if they've ever had a civil citation previously, because in our community you get one bite of the apple. If you've ever had a civil citation, you don't get a second one. The neat thing about this is that this is applicable in other communities where we have a set of misdemeanors that you're eligible to participate in. Another community could say, well, we're not going to be as extensive as Circuit 2. We only want to do drug and alcohol. Then only those offenses would pop up. So it can be tailored to any community to meet whatever standards they have. As we operationalize this, I mean, our greatest partner is obviously the police department. We first started out with TPD, the sheriff's office has come online, TCC, and of course we're working with FSU and FAMU at this point in time. There is no age limit. for this population. We've had kids, obviously 18 to someone in their 60s. And so we'll have the breakdown next year for all these statistics, but I wanted to let you know the preliminary data that we have is pretty good. I mean, it's better than I thought, and I think you'll find it fascinating. So let me turn it over to Greg at this point, because it takes pretty much a number of agencies to make this thing happen. There's a lot of coordination. It's not a simple system to implement or to operate, but when you operationalize this, you obviously law enforcement is the key to this entire program. So let me turn it over to Greg Frost.
Thank you, Tom. No, okay. We'll do it this way. Wow. I'm going to make this very personal for each of you here, and I hope no one is offended by this. As I look around the room, I see a lot of very successful people, folks that are very well educated, very well experienced. So let's make this individualized with what I'm going to be talking about here in a second. Go back to when you were late teens, early 20s. How many of you, besides me, did something that you could have been arrested for, and just based on the circumstances, you weren't? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Okay. That was a good integrity test for y'all. You passed it, by the way. Now think about if you had been arrested, where would you be sitting right now? Would you be in the chair you're in, or would you be somewhere else? It is very personal. What those police officers do at 2 o'clock in the morning when we have the college student that Tom was talking about that had a crack pipe, no, not a crack pipe, I'm sorry, it was a marijuana, yeah, hookah, there you go, a marijuana pipe in his car. It does get personal. You know, that person, if they're a bluebird, as Tom calls them, they see their entire future crashing around their ankles, and that's the reality of it. I've spent 30 years in law enforcement. Most of that time has been in administrative and research and planning, new program development. So my experience at 2 o'clock in the morning on the streets dealing with real bad guys is fairly limited. But the privilege I have had is seeing a lot of the consequences of what happens to folks who come in contact with law enforcement and who are then, for lack of a better term, subjected to the criminal justice system and the consequences of that. Our criminal justice system, by design, is a fairly blunt tool. If you're arrested on a criminal charge, we basically have two things that are going to be consequences for you. We're either going to take your money or we're going to take your freedom. Those are the two things. And I think what we're finding is that limitation is creating an awful lot of human collateral damage. We're seeing an awful lot of future potential in young individuals, young adults, being marginalized. And that has a huge, huge cost to our society. And I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. You all probably know more about that than I do. So when Tom came to us and said, we've successfully worked with the Tallahassee Police Department with the Juvenile Assessment Center. We've successfully established a juvenile civil citation program. He had a lot of credibility when he said, I'd like to try an adult civil citation. And quite frankly, the first time he pitched it to me, I'm not sure if I threw you out of my office or I laughed first, one or the other, but I really didn't take it very seriously until I started thinking about it and Tom started explaining the benefits to it, and it just makes all the sense in the world. And the thing that really got my attention was he said, oh, by the way, it's not going to cost government anything. The fees and all the associated costs to set up this program in Leon County would be borne by the individuals who go through the program. So for those of you that are in a law enforcement agency, I'm not sure how many times you've had a social service provider come to you and say, we'd like to help you, and oh, by the way, we don't want money. That's pretty rare in my experience. So as we worked through the political approval, the community group approval to get this started, because as Tom said, this is very unique. This is, as far as we can tell, a first in the nation type program, and certainly if someone else is aware of a similar program, we would very much like to hear about it and see what they're doing. But we had to operationalize it. Once we had that approval from the leadership within the Second Judicial Circuit, we had to operationalize it, and we brought a group of sworn officers together from TPD as well as from the Leon County Sheriff's Office to say, okay, here's an opportunity. We've got a chance in our community to do something really good. What offenses do we think we need to include? Because Tom's approach had been drug and alcohol. And our folks, when we sat down and started thinking through this, we realized, no, we need to broaden that net a little bit. So we started going down the road of things like petty theft. We even included some violent crimes. We included simple assault, simple battery that are non-domestic violence related. So you've got to have if it's one of those two violent crimes, it's got to be a fairly unique circumstance to receive the option of a civil citation. Being a university town, we knew we were going to have a lot of underage drinking, so we included that. We included the drug paraphernalia. We included the possession of marijuana under 20 grams. Our public defender made a passionate plea to include criminal traffic offenses. You get that 20-year-old that his girlfriend just broke up with him, and he decides to spin his tires and go tearing down the road at 90 miles an hour, driving with his emotions. Now suddenly he's a criminal if he gets caught. We did not include that. Even with her passionate plea, we decided not to start off with criminal traffic as a part of our selected offenses. I think it's reasonable, once we see if this is working, that we'll be expanding to include things like that. And I think we may be surprised as the program grows, the types of offenses that may be reasonably handled through an adult civil citation. Our biggest goal, though, while there's the human factor to it, and obviously, law enforcement officers aren't necessarily known for being soft and a whole bunch of do-gooders, we want to see recidivism go down. That's really our dime in this game is the recidivism. If we can keep someone from committing future crimes, we're improving public safety, and we're doing our jobs. So those are the main things. And I see Gail stand up. Am I getting the high sign?
2 minutes.
That's my 2-minute warning. Okay. All right. Well, let me just run over very quickly. I think conceptually you all get the picture. It's not complicated, and it seems to make a whole lot of sense. And the statistics that you see up on the screen, we started this in March of 2013. We've had approximately 250 individuals receive adult civil citations, whether that's from TPD or from LCSO. And you can see up there the results of the folks who have completed it successfully, those who haven't completed it successfully, the types of offenses that we are issuing citations for, gender and race breakdown. I think from the seat I sit in, I'm very pleased with how our officers are handling the program. They've embraced it very, very quickly. And I think you can see from those numbers that the citations they're issuing are being issued very appropriately. Next. Thank you.
Let me just close. Of course, Mark Fontaine said, don't do this. And of course, I don't want you to think I'm being passive aggressive, but one of the things we wanted to do is we want to look at what is the true cost of this thing, or the cost avoidance. And Greg started out by saying, how many of you may not have been here had you done something? We just got some information from FDLE. It's rough, and I'm not holding anyone to it, but we're trying to get the basic data set. And what we have is, I think that there's around 30 30,000 new first-time misdemeanor arrests per year in these offenses each year in Florida. That's 30,000. All right, now we're talking about the marginalization that takes place, the inability to get in school, jobs, military, et cetera, et cetera. And I checked with, I scurried about when Mark Levine was here and Ed Lassity, and they were interested in this, and we said we'd send all the data, but I said, look, we're looking at the cost data. I said, what is the cost over a career? I said, is it safe to assume $500,000, million, like in lost income, and also lost ability to pay taxes, become a member of society, et cetera, et cetera? And he said that's probably an understatement. So I wanted to point that out to Mark, that I had some PhD types rather than someone with a GED say that we actually have, there is some baseline data. So if you look at that 30,000 people that could have been diverted over a lifetime, guess what that number is? And I'm not good with, I mentioned computers, but I'm fairly good with arithmetic. That comes out to $30 billion. Okay? That's with a B. So I just want you to think about it. That's in 1 year. So when you look at the cost to society or that individual, lost taxes, family, income, et cetera, it's something to think about. And that's what we're trying to do, is quantify it. So I hope when I come back next year, I'll have a good number with some additional sources that can verify that. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom and Greg. And now we're going to hear from Catherine Burns, the Jacksonville Reentry Center.
Where is it?
Oh, Tom's got the clicker phone.
The clicker phone? Good morning. I am so excited to hear about your civil citation program. I'm all for intervention, keeping individuals from deep ending into the system. However, I'm at the opposite end of the podium. I don't have any bluebirds in my program. I'd like to share with you a little bit about how the Jacksonville Reentry Center was born. Really, it was because Jacksonville led the state of Florida as the murder capital, and of course no mayor wants to have that dubious distinction, nor the commissioners. So a number of years ago they did a study and they brought together about 150 people in the community, and they wanted a multi-layered attack on reducing recidivism in the community. One of the branches that they chose to address this was dealing with adult offenders returning to the community, recognizing that those individuals would probably be the individuals that would be committing the new crimes in our community. So, the mission of the Jacksonville Reentry Center, click. There we go. Click. Okay, you can see I'm so technically savvy. All right, really, our mission is to just reduce recidivism, helping those ex-offenders return to the community. So that is what we're all about. We're really about helping those individuals that return to us that sometimes have not been rehabilitated in any way, shape, or form, sometimes having spent a life sentence in prison up to just a year and a day. So we get the whole spectrum of individuals returning from the system. So we try to connect the dots for them, so to speak. We try to help them to navigate the system, to know where the services are available. Many of the services we provide in-house. I'm going to describe to you the three parts, really. We have an entire staff that addresses this issue. We have 6 reentry specialists. They all have degrees, and they are all very committed to this job. It is not for the pay, I will say. We have had stability in the staff. Most of them have been there since its inception. I did have 7 reentry specialists. I took one of those away and hired an employment specialist. The reason that I hired an employment specialist was because for the sex offender, the violent offender, or the offender over 55, we had little to no place to send that individual for employment. So we determined that we needed someone in-house simply because there was nowhere out of house to send them. So the employment specialist requires that individuals that want services from us, and I'll describe what those are, and if they're unemployed, that they agree to go through our career development orientation. They go through a complete assessment of their skills. We work with them on a resume, on mock interviews before we develop a job for them. Do we develop a job for all of them? Especially as a sex predator, that's the most challenging. No, we're not successful with all of them, but we are having great success with many of them. We have 2 clerical staff that assist us. We also have an accountant and me. Now, prior to this year, all of the staff were not city retirement employees. They were considered temporary employees. This year, all of the funding that formerly was from the Journey, it was kind of like a pilot program, has now been given to the sheriff's office, so all of the staff are now becoming permanent employees. One of the challenges that we had this year was because they're becoming permanent employees, that reduced my dollars a little bit, and we also took a 14% reduction in our overall program this year. So we're a little bit challenged, and we had to reduce the number of individuals that we serve so that we could keep fidelity in the program. Some of the types of services that we provide, we are a three-month program. It started out 1 year, and when we evaluated our data, we found out that after about 3 months, the individuals disappeared. It didn't matter that they had signed a year's contract, and they were supposed to be in touch with us every week. We do have the ability to extend the contract if the individual still has a legitimate reason to need our assistance. We do provide mental health treatment through our community contract providers, substance abuse evaluation, substance abuse treatment, mental health evaluation and treatment, sex offender evaluation treatment, batters intervention, anger management. So those are the mental health services that we provide. We pay for those services for the individuals. And of course, just like you would do, we hold them accountable. If they are not showing up for the services, then we're not going to continue to pay for those services. We pay for the identification. That can be anything from buying a Florida ID. It can be helping a female that needs an ID to get her divorce records or change of name. We can get a driver's license. We do not pay for fines or fees. We provide for transitional housing. We only pay at this time for 21 days of housing, but the city, through emergency services, will continue an additional 60 days. So basically, they get free 3 months of housing. Our greatest challenge is when the sex offender runs out of housing and he has not gotten on his own feet yet. They cannot go to a shelter. So that is the greatest challenge that we face. For an individual that does not have a sex crime and they run out of housing and they still don't have a job, we can work with our community shelters and other partners to get them services. We have an extensive service for veterans, and typically that's not a problem at all for us in Jacksonville. Work readiness items, we are able to pay for those through a city burn grant. Because we didn't have that in our budget, so we got a little mini grant of $50-some thousand, so we can buy work tools and boots and clothing items for the individuals that we work with as we assist them in finding a job. We do provide bus passes. They are weekly bus passes. When an individual returns the used bus pass, does anybody know why we want them to return the used bus pass? We don't want them selling it. Okay? They return the used bus pass. They come back with what's required of them, a job search form filled out front and back. We also work with the Department of Corrections, and we accept, of course, if they're under supervision, that same job search form. We do not reinvent the wheel. So we provide the bus passes, and we also got smart. Our budget, because bus passes through the JTA Transit Authority doubled the price. It was going to cost us almost $60,000 a year in bus passes. So we worked out an MOA in our inmate trustees that do welding for our JSO, does the repairs for the bus stops and the buses and the bike racks, so that that is no longer out of our pocket. We also have partners that are on site with us. We have felony registration. We have 4 officers that when an individual returns to Duval County, the first place that they come is the Jacksonville Reentry Center, and that is why we call it the portal of entry. We also have 2 staff on board that are with Family Support Services. They wrote a little mini grant with us, and we work with recruiting mentors for incarcerated parents that are returning to Duval County. We have a licensed mental health worker because JSO has their own health department. What we found in the past was that we were referring all of the clients that were court-ordered for a substance abuse evaluation to our community partners, and there was never a case. We were told that a client didn't need 12 weeks of services, thank you. So we had our own licensed mental health worker come to JSO, to the Jacksonville Reentry Center. We schedule appointments for them to have a mental health and substance abuse evaluation. If it is determined through that evaluation that they need services, then we refer them to our community partners and we pay for that. You can't believe how much money we've saved. We didn't mind paying for those that needed the services, but now we're paying for those that we really know need the services, if you follow my drift. So, this is a little bit about some of the services that we provided last year. And I'm going to go back and talk to you a little bit about the Memorandum of Understanding and the agreement and partnership that we have with the Florida Department of Corrections. Typically, these are not all of the services, but I am accountable for every penny that's spent, just like all of you all are. And so here you can see that we purchased 219 birth certificates, 595 received clothing. I get donated because I cannot purchase that with my funding, along with food. I can't, because I'm not a not-for-profit, I don't get the food for free. So community partners such as faith-based partners help provide dry goods for us. When an individual returns from prison, they don't have but the $50 in their pocket. If we're going to provide transitional housing, they don't have food stamps yet. So I send them to housing and they've got no food to eat. That's not going to work very well. That's why we have to have a food closet also, a food pantry in-house. You can see we provide hygiene kits, bus tokens. We have a community partner that comes in every month and does eye screening for individuals that need glasses. If they only need reading glasses, they are provided right there that day. If they need to see an eye doctor, that is arranged. It is all free of charge, and we have had interventions with people that have had glaucoma and the levels in their eyes were so high they had to go directly to an emergency room. If there had not been an intervention through our community partners that come to our site, that individual would have been blind. So we do not do this in a silo. We depend very much not only on the funding that we have allocated to us, but in utilizing the services that are available through our community partners. Is it working? I want to tell you that obviously it is working. 81% of the participants, we had over 800 last year that were either completed the program. That means they went through the 3 months of the program. They did everything that they were obligated to do. They met with their caseworker on a weekly basis. They did whatever they were obligated to do. If they had to go for substance abuse treatment, they completed that. That's considered a completer. We also had individuals that we call a non-completer. That means we may have assisted you in giving you a few weekly bus passes. Maybe we helped you get a job, maybe not through my job developer. Maybe your case manager worked with you to get a job. We gave you 21 days of housing and then you disappeared. I used to think in the beginning, oh my gosh, we have as many disappearing as we have completing. But the statistics have shown us in the last 2 years that we could follow the recidivism rate, and I'll explain how we track that. That those that complete and those that do not complete have almost the exact same recidivism rate. It's an 81 completion rate. 81% do not get rearrested. So, Now let me just tell you a little bit about this partnership that I began to talk to you about, that our former mayor and our sheriff came up with the idea. The sheriff and a former Department of Corrections secretary came upon an agreement that it made sense to have offenders that would be returning to Duval County come to an institution close by so that our community partners could begin to work with them pre-release. So the Florida Department of Corrections agreed to utilize Baker Correctional Institution. There my caseworkers go and work with the inmates pre-release. We also go to Columbia, we go to Lake City, and we go to Lottie. The other institutions that we do not go to, we recruit the inmates based upon the release criteria from the Department of Corrections. 2,300 return to the return to Duval County. So we send letters to those inmates through the classification officers, letting them know about the services in Duval. If they're going to be indigent and they're in Tomoka, that classification officer simply lets us know 2 weeks in advance. Our Jacksonville Reentry Center case manager is assigned, and we begin working with them at that point. So we provide pre- and post-release services. The program is working. It has worked very well, and we track our recidivism based on the same thing as the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, that is, any arrest within a year of release. So even if your charges were dropped, you would still be considered a recidivist on our tracking system. So we have to have 1 year of them being released. In the 2 years that we have with them being released at least a year, our recidivism rate is 81%, and this year it is a reduction from JSO of 48%. Thank you.
She's not passionate at all about what she does. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Judge Steve Leifman.
Good morning. It's no surprise to anyone here that we have a very, very serious mental health and substance use crisis in this state. In any given year in Florida, there are approximately 170,000 people who at the time of their arrest need acute mental health care treatment, and about 70 to 80% of those individuals have a co-occurring disorder. In the United States, there are approximately 130,000 homeless vets. Almost half of them have a serious mental illness, and more than that, have a substance use issue. Half of the homeless vets in the United States live in 4 states, Florida being one of them. The fiscal impact for our failure to address these issues is enormous. In Miami-Dade County, we did a local study with the University of South Florida, Florida Mental Health Institute. We wanted to know who the highest utilizers of criminal justice mental health services were in our community, because the idea was if we could get our arms wrapped around this population, we could start to get better outcomes. FMHI, the Florida Mental Health Institute, has incredible capability of looking at data from FDLE, Baker Act, and Medicaid, and they can blend all that information. Now, Dade County has the largest percentage of people with mental illnesses of any urban area in the United States. It's almost 3 times the national average. 9.1% of our general population, that's 177,000 adults and 55,000 children who live in Miami-Dade County, have a very serious mental illness. Now, when I got this data back, I thought I was going to get a list of thousands of individuals. To my amazement, I got one piece of paper with 97 names on it. These 97 individuals, almost primarily men, primarily diagnosed with schizophrenia, over a 5-year period, were arrested in Dade County almost 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in the Dade County Jail, 13,000 days at some type of crisis unit or hospital, and cost taxpayers almost $13 million, and we got absolutely nothing for it. I guarantee you, everyone in this room has those 97 people in their community. If you look at some of the statewide issues, it gets even worse. Now, I used to think that maybe we were better off with those 97 sending them all to Harvard. It would have been cheaper, and at least maybe they would have gotten an education out of the deal. The other part of the problem at the state level is at the forensic commitment side. Florida now spends almost one-third of all of its adult mental health public dollars, that's almost $250 million, to try to restore competency for 3,000 people. Think about it. We have 170,000 people a year who at the time of their arrest need acute mental health care and substance use treatment, but we're spending one-third of all of our dollars on 3,000 people to restore them to competency when, as it turns out, 70% of those individuals come back from these forensic facilities and have three things happen to them. They either get credit time served, probation, or their charges are dropped, and they go back to the community with little or no services when they get out. It actually meets the definition of insanity, where we keep doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome. And it is failing miserably. And the state does not raise taxes. So what are they doing? They're taking the money from the community providers to pay for this acute ended system. And so they're making it harder for people to get access in the community, and they're spending more and more money each year on the high acute services. It is ridiculous. It's grown over by 100% in the last 10 years, and it's killing our system, and it needs to be addressed. And I'll talk about that in a minute, how to do it. And even worse is on the prison side. The fastest growing subpopulation in Florida prisons are people with mental illnesses. It has grown by about 165% in the last 10 years. It has gone from about 8,000 prison inmates with a serious mental illness to 18,000 today. It's growing so fast that the state is projecting it will double again in the next 10 years. If that in fact happens, and it is beginning to happen, Florida will need to build 10 new prisons just to handle the growth of its mental health population. It's a good thing you're sitting down, because the cost to build and operate 10 new prisons in Florida just for people with mental illnesses is $3.6 billion. Florida now spends one out of every $10 that you pay in taxes today in Florida goes to prisons. If this occurs, you will be spending 2 out of $10, 20% of the state's budget, on prisons. Most of these individuals are not committing serious offenses. The average stay for someone in prison with a mental illness is only 2.5 to 4 years. They've accumulated so many points because of their mental health and substance use issues, they just end up in prison because of the accumulation of points. There's something wrong with a society that would be willing to spend more money to incarcerate people that are ill than to treat them. So how do we fix it? It begins at the local community. And it requires all of us, the judiciary and all the traditional and non-traditional stakeholders, to come together to develop collaborations to turn this problem around. We did this about 14 years ago in Miami-Dade County, and the results have been startling. We actually put together all kinds of written agreements. We had a summit, which I recommend that every community do, and map out how your criminal justice and mental health services and substance use services intersect with your criminal justice system, so you can figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how to fix it. We actually came up with a goal that basically said diversion and linkages to comprehensive care makes jail the last resort. This isn't about keeping people that need to go to jail out. It's about keeping people that don't need to go to jail out of the system and getting them treated. We came up with 3 or 4 different significant principles, and one is that we needed a pre-arrest diversion type program. We looked around the country. By far, the Memphis Model Crisis Intervention Team program was the best. We now have over 4,000 police officers in Miami-Dade County trained in CIT. This is a 40-hour program where officers are trained how to identify people who are in a major mental health crisis, how to de-escalate a situation, and how to divert individuals to crisis units instead of arresting them. We have 36 police agencies in Dade County. Every single one is trained. To give you an idea of its success, last year, the City of Miami and Miami-Dade, just 2 of our 36 agencies, did over 10,000 mental health calls. Out of those 10,000 calls, they only made 27 arrests. This is Miami, folks. Our jail plummeted last year from over 7,800 to 5,000 today. In one of the worst economic crises in this country, we closed a jail, saving the county $12 million. It is a huge success. Police shootings have stopped, police injuries have stopped, and people are getting the care that they need so they don't come back and recycle. We also have 3 post-arrest diversion programs. We have a misdemeanor diversion program. If you get arrested on a misdemeanor in Dade County and you have a serious mental illness, within 24 to 48 hours, you are diverted to a crisis unit. And because they are out on a criminal hold, the Baker Act 72 hours does not apply. So we send them out. We have collaborations and cooperative agreements with all the different providers. We send the individual for about 2 weeks to a crisis unit to really give them time to stabilize. We have 8 peer specialists, 4 of them who graduated from our program, go out and meet with those individuals. You heard from Cindy Schwartz. We get all their benefits all lined up through SOAR while they're in the program. And so when they're ready to come out, all the comprehensive services are available to them for discharge. And if they agree to go into our program and stay in for a year, in many instances the charges are dropped or they're given a withhold of adjudication. The recidivism in our misdemeanor population dropped from 72% to 20% this year. It is phenomenally successful. It worked so well that we were able to expand it by showing the state attorney the great success we're having, and now we're doing nonviolent felonies. The recidivism rate among those that complete the program, which is most of the individuals, is holding at about 6%. Over the last 5 years, the program is so successful that we have saved Dade County 35 years of jail bed days. And we have basically stopped the growth of our jail population in Dade County. Now, the third diversion, which goes back to the second thing I talked about, which is forensic commitment. Now, you have to understand, forensic commitment are for people that are charged with felonies, who are incompetent to stand trial, and are refusing to go into the community for their restoration. And this is the 3,000 people that are costing $250 million and getting us very little results. So as part of a Supreme Court initiative, when we looked at this problem, when there was a major constitutional crisis in 2007, we realized that the main focus for people that are not looking at prison should not be competency restoration, but community reintegration. Because the way it works now is once you have been quote-unquote restored, you go back to jail, you sit anywhere from a month to 6 months waiting for your charges to get taken care of. And in many of those cases, the medications get changed or stopped, the person decompensates and goes back. It's $60,000 to $70,000 a bed, folks. It's expensive. And nothing happens. And then they get the credit time served probation, or the charges are dropped because witnesses aren't available. Well, we have a new program in Dade County that we are strongly recommending the legislature put out throughout the state. We have one provider, which is Jackson Memorial Hospital, where we take people that are not looking at prison, we send them over to the hospital. It's a locked facility, and instead of just focusing on their restoration, we're putting an entire plan together for community reintegration, and once they're released, they stay with that particular provider. The results have been stunning. We get people out, about 46%, they're restored at 46% quicker. It's about a third cheaper. And out of all the individuals that finish the program, which is about 85% of the individuals, we've only had one person commit a new offense, and it was a petty theft. So the recidivism has gone down substantially. The costs are down substantially. People don't go back to jail to wait for their charges to be adjudicated. They go right to court. And in most cases, they're put on probation with a special condition that they stay in this program for treatment. And it works. They're ill. And that is the main problem going on in this situation. We're getting smarter in dealing with it. Perfect. We are also looking at a couple major initiatives that we think will really help us impact the final group that we're having a more difficult time to get to. The state of Florida was generous and gave the county an old state hospital for $1 a year for 99 years. And the taxpayers of Dade County passed a $22.1 million bond issue for us. And we are now building or renovating what will be the first of its kind in the country, a forensic diversion facility. And the idea will be, instead of taking people who are coming into the criminal system and adjudicating their case and kicking them to the curb and expecting them not to come back, we'll put them through this new facility, which will have a short-term residential facility, a crisis unit, a meaningful day activity program, a supportive employment program where we're going to put a culinary program in there, and other supportive employment issues. All the services will be under one roof. Probation, there'll be a courtroom in there to take care of their cases. Any other psychosocial services will be in there, and everything they need. We're also looking at possibly building a 100 to 200 supportive housing unit on top of the parking lot in the facility because it's so big. And that way people can get everything they need, and instead of just going back to the community once their case is resolved, we help them reintegrate appropriately and let them get into recovery. And the other thing that is so incredible and so fascinating that we're working on, we've been chosen by Otsuka Pharmaceutical to become the beta test site to see if predictive analytics can be used in the behavioral health space. For those of you who are not familiar with predictive analytics, it's also known as Watson technology. It's the computer that beat those guys in Jeopardy! And what it does, it's artificial intelligence that can predict. A lot of police departments are now using it successfully to predict where crime may occur before it happens. We're looking right now to see if we could use it in behavioral health. And what it's going to help us do, and we're about 2/3 ready to turn it on, we will be able to develop an actual continuity of care system. So no matter where you show up, whether it's a jail, a crisis unit, or a hospital, facial recognition will have all the data and information for the individual, so we'll know their diagnosis, their main treatment, and what's working. We'll know which providers can provide the best services for their individuals, and over time with enough data we believe we'll be able to predict somebody before they get arrested, before they get hospitalized, and we'll be able to get them services before they get so sick they end up in the acute system. We'll keep you appraised to how this goes forward. We're very excited about it, but it looks very, very encouraging at this time. I also would strongly recommend to the legislature that they put together a task force of the committees that affect these issues. It's not good enough just to have the DCF people or the criminal justice people look at these separately. These issues are all interrelated. And as chair of the Supreme Court's task force on mental health and substance abuse, we are also now looking at the Baker Act. This is a law that is 40 years old that's based on a 1700-year-old law, 1700 law out of New York that focuses on people's dangerousness. We need to start looking at people's need for treatment. It is significantly different. There is so much research and data out there that today shows us that the longer we go without treating individuals, the more likely it is that the person may have permanent brain damage. We can't just be looking at if they're dangerous to themselves or their others. We need to be making sure that if they're sick, that we help them get treatment so they don't keep coming back through these systems. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Judge. I think you'll agree that we could probably do a whole day on any one of these ideas. So now Mike Judnick is going to kind of tie it all together for us, and then maybe we'll have a few minutes for questions. Thank you, Mike.
Is this on? I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm very impressed with what I've heard and what I see, and the commitment everybody has toward addressing what I see as a national crisis. We can't build any more prisons. We need to be looking at alternatives, and so many of these are being addressed here and throughout the country, I think, and we're looking at new and innovative approaches all the time and making some real progress. And I thought I would bring forth some considerations that we might want to think about as we look toward providing services to the clients that come to us that I think are pretty universal around the processes of change, and yet we need to also have a very focused, individualized consideration about the way we approach that. One of our fundamental tenets that we always look toward is that in the process of change, all change is effectively self-change, and if we think it happens anywhere else, then we're off. And if that's the case, then we need to begin focusing in on an individualized approach that focuses in on providing the person that needs to make that change the tools and resources and support in order to effectively do that. If we think we're going to do that through systems and staff, and all those things are very important in support of that, but we always see, it's my sense, that what goes to the client many times is the trickle-down leftovers that don't have any relevance or permanency to the client. And so I think we need to always focus in on, as we're applying interventions, what do we do that makes the most sense to the person that we're charged to serve. Everybody's probably seen this chart there, and I think that one of the things that we need to look at is have these basic principles of effective intervention drive the approach that we take with individuals, and every one of these, I think, need to be addressed and congruent in the way that we go about doing and providing our services. And you can access this in a number of ways. I'm not going to dwell on the individual parts of it, but we'll talk about some of the elements that integrate within this that I think are really critical. The other thing that I'm hearing here and strongly advocate for and see as a national trend, a healthy national trend, is we need to look at supporting alternative sentencing options. What Tom has alluded to with the civil citation programs that he has in place, alternative sentencing, movement toward community corrections, the huge impact that the problem-solving courts are having throughout the country, are innovative, effective, growing exponentially, and most importantly, moving people out of the system, away from that stigmatization that carries forth into their life, impacting their families and their communities, focusing in on providing alternatives such as these problem-solving courts that now have morphed out of the drug court model and address families and veterans and mental health courts and all these specific elements, bringing resources within the communities together to address that, are really things that we need to not only recognize and follow, but we need to actively support and advocate for within our local communities, because they're not going to happen on their own. And when you look toward innovators, and this is part of what Tom has alluded to, that's stepping out, and you said the problem with being out in front is that you take a lot of the arrows, but if we're not innovating new approaches to make treatment and intervention services accessible and available to clients, then we need to rethink our prime directive about what our jobs and our life and our missions are. A couple of the driving principles that again are alluded to in the chart here is we need to have assessment-driven approaches that target needs and target those and apply those services at appropriate levels based on appropriate dosage and intensity of those services. But I stress the individualization of that process. I think too many times I sense that we work through a compliance-based approach, kind of a one-size-fits-all. We run them through a administratively driven programmatic construct, I think, in many cases, because we're doing what everybody does or what the approach du jour happens to be. And I really think we need to pay close attention. Going back to the first point, it's all about the individual and determining what they need in providing those services in ways that make sense to them, that target their needs at, again, appropriate levels, it isn't a one-size-fits-all. And again, the thing that's striking to me in the interface I have with programs throughout the country is a kind of an orientation that it's more of a administrative/staff-centric approach, as opposed to giving the individual the attention and the focus to derive and define and refine and apply those things that are relevant to that person. And it's particularly difficult when we're dealing with the numbers that we're dealing with and staff-to-client ratios. And so we need to find ways to address a lot of those things. And I think we can articulate some solutions around that. The other thing that I think that we need to do, and backing up to that, I think that we need to make sure that our work is driven by an appropriate risk needs assessment. So we're identifying where those primary needs are, and let that also be not a final one-time application, but something that needs to be reevaluated on an ongoing basis, so we can make programmatic adjustments based on the progress as well as the needs of the individual. I think we also need to look at quantifying and qualifying our outcomes in a dynamic fashion. I don't think that it's enough just to track ultimate collective recidivism data. Yes, that's important. That's a driving force. But I also think that we need to have dynamic measurements of client progress along the way. One of the things that we try to do in the curriculum we provide is provide pre-post tests and measurements that can be used at appropriate intervals that take into account the participants' progress, the perspective from the facilitator or case manager or whoever's providing those services, and fidelity measures from an administrative standpoint to ensure that services are being applied effectively. And not just a pre-post test. I think the more we can do that in a dynamic fashion, it enables us to make managerial adjustments to the way our services are being delivered, as well as then reporting progress. I mean, it's not a beginning and end deal here. The change is not a linear event. It is a process, and that process is not linear, and it is 3 steps forward and 2 steps back in many cases, and particularly where we deal with a focus on recidivism. A big portion of what we do is in the area of addiction treatment, and part of the addiction treatment dynamic is that a relapse is a consistent and an expected part of the recovery process, and that a lapse is not necessarily a relapse, and they get back on track, and that's part of that process. And as we look toward justice-involved clients, a lapse or a relapse constitutes in many cases a revocation, and that goes against our numbers of efficacy in some cases, and yet I think we need to regard that in a little bit of a different context, my own personal opinion. I think that we need to enhance effective facilitation despite the limitations of staff and space. I think in many cases those are the things that drive our limitations. I have this concept of optimized intervention services. I mean, if we were able to run everybody through 300, 400, 500 hours appropriately staffed with staff at master's level facilitation in every instance, that would be wonderful. But we live in the real world, and I think too many times the concepts that are espoused, however valid they are, don't take into account real life and the things that are taking place in the world we operate in, with the constraints and the budget limitations, the staffing, the limitation from a qualitative as well as a quantitative standpoint. We have a hard time accommodating the number of clients in all of our jurisdictions that we would like to and maybe should be serving at appropriate levels. So I think we need to optimize that and make the best of that where we can. And I think a lot of that trends toward innovative approaches. And again, I defer back to some of the things that Tom is involved with, where we're migrating some of what we're doing with these brief and early interventions into an electronic and digital format where an individual can engage in that process. I think that there's more and more demand, particularly in my work with the prison systems, that is emerging right now, where we're looking on self-directed in-cell programming. I think that if we're taking into consideration the self-change process and understand the capability of individuals to engage in that process, we can support that and deliver services that otherwise we wouldn't be able to this mass of individuals that are in need of these. I think that as we're looking toward calling upon paraprofessionals and volunteers in many cases to be able to deliver some of those services, that provides some options to us. And I think that there's a lot of demand placed on the faith-based and community-based resources. And so all of these are some thoughts that we could go on and on about. I think the other thing we need to make sure to do is to really address and be cognizant of the responsivity issues, understanding what those are and mitigate those wherever we can, and then engage the family and community in active support. A lot of times we just see them as being incidental to the process, sometimes an encumbrance to it, and certainly disenabled in many cases based on funding and capabilities and those kinds of things to engage them. So those are some takeaway points that I hope will be helpful, and I appreciate the opportunity. I see that she's standing up, so I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have time for questions, or are we done? One or two questions, if anybody has any. I know we've already had a request for your program information from Judge Leifman, so.
Over on the left.
Oh, yes, sir.
I just had a question for Judge Leifman. Clearly, you understand the principles that are happening. What strikes me is that you come from a legal mind. And I would just like...
That's the best compliment I've had in a while.
Thank you very much for your service as well. I just wanted to know if you could share how you arrived to the understanding that you have, because I'm just not used to seeing it.
I think judges see more people with serious mental illness in a week than a psychiatrist does in a year. Seriously, in the criminal division. And we weren't trained for this. And I've had some really horrific cases. And they're just heartbreaking. They're devastating to all of us that are involved. And I think the most frustrating thing for a judge is not to be able to fix something when it's in front of you, and to see somebody go out and either hurt someone else or hurt themselves. And I think just out of necessity, we had to learn. And actually, for me, it started with a case I had. The defendant turned out to be the former head of psychiatry at Jacksonville Memorial Hospital. He was a Harvard-educated doctor who had a late onset of schizophrenia and became homeless and involved in our criminal justice system. And it was a real eye-opener. And the volume we have in Dade County is staggering. We have about 1,200 people a day on antipsychotic medication. And we have 20,000 people a year in our jail with serious mental illnesses. So it's a lot, and we've just been forced to learn it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Sheriff Esslinger.
Thank you, Gail. I, too, appreciate your leadership in this area, Judge, and to you, Gail, as well, for your hard work on this.
Thank you.
Question for both of you, actually, is what's your opinion of why assisted outpatient treatment plan is so underutilized when it's so successful, not only in the state, but in New York and other jurisdictions?
First of all, I want to turn the compliment back to you. You've been an incredible leader in this area, and for those of you that are not familiar with the work that Sheriff Esselstyn has done, it's really been groundbreaking and remarkable, and he is the only county in Florida that is utilizing assisted outpatient treatment, and I wish everyone would do it. Unfortunately, when they wrote the law, they put a little line at the end of it that said that you don't have to do it if you don't have the resources. And everyone has kind of used that as an excuse, in my opinion, not to do it. And part of it is the probate divisions are pretty overwhelmed with their other cases. But there's a lot of good data out of a study that was done with MacArthur Foundation and Duke that shows that assisted outpatient is very successful, and all you have to do is look at Seminole County's data to see how successful it is. I think one of the things that we should do is work with the legislature to either expand it or maybe put it into the criminal justice side and take it out of probate so that more people would be willing to do it. But I do think it's a good program, and I think it should be expanded, and I think it's a shame that we have 1 out of 67 counties operating it.
Okay, one more.
This question is for Tom. I'm also from a college town, Gainesville. My question for you, Tom, is have any other counties kind of contacted you or are looking at your adult civil citation model?
I would hope to report next year that we've got some of the largest jurisdictions in Florida and some other places. Can you hear me, everyone here?
Yeah, they're taping it.
Yeah, I would, we're working with a number of groups right now, so I would tell you, I mean, you know, Fontaine thinks I have a, propensity to over-exaggerate, but I think that if you look at our system, I think this is going to be a fundamental change. I think we recognize that I think they use the term over-criminalization. And I think we're there. I think we now realize, look at the cost, and are there better ways to do it? And all I tried to do, and all the people that we work with, is we've got a better mousetrap. That's it. We came up with a better way, a more effective way. We don't penalize people for the rest of their life, and we intervene. So, what's wrong with that model? And the only other thing I would take credit for is that, have you noticed that FSU has a national championship and you don't?
All righty then. I guess I think we're done. Thank you all very much.